This is a world aptly named the God's Lands because in the land of this world, which is mostly comprised of a single continent and some outlying islands, the world is completely ruled over by a number of different gods, 19 to be specific, each one with their own country.
Hey everyone, and welcome. I am Morgan Gist McDonald, founder CEO of Paper Raven Books, and I have with us today a super special guest who is launching a brand new book, the first in a trilogy. And if you love epic fantasy, world building, some magic, some man against society, running away from the government, trying to survive, trying to figure out the power plays in the world, then you are going to love Fire's Folly. It is the first in the trilogy of the God's Land. And I have with us today to talk more about this book and this series, author Dean Richard Kayler. Dean, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course, this is such a fun series to talk about with you because you've done an incredible amount of world building. We're definitely going to talk about that. And I'd love for you to kind of introduce us, who do we kind of get to meet and what's happening in this world of Fire's Folly?
Okay, so I guess just to start off with the world, because honestly, in many ways, it's kind of my favorite part. It's what got me excited about writing the book. This is a world aptly named the God's Lands because in the land of this world, which is mostly comprised of a single continent and some outlying islands, the world is completely ruled over by a number of different gods, 19 to be specific, each one with their own country. There's a few exceptions to that, but you can find out about it in the book. But each of these gods rules over a specific element in nature. You've got some of the classics: fire, water, wind, earth, and then some more expanded ones: lightning, ice, light, dark, and then a few that are, at least in my experience, a bit more unique. You've got the gods of plant and beast, and then some of my favorites that get talked about, but you won't actually see, are the body gods of like blood, flesh, and bone. And so this world, a bit over 7,000 years ago, these gods came down to the world with this kind of idea of having a solitary, like, king of the gods, or queen, doesn't matter, a ruler for the gods, one being above all the rest, and they couldn't decide among themselves. The gods are equal. So they decided to come down to the world and have their followers fight each other, and the winner would determine who sits on the throne of heaven. And that was about over 7,000 years ago. And so now you have this world that in all these different countries ruled by these gods and their followers in the churches. So the governments of each country is a church devoted to the fire god, the wind god, the lightning god, like that. And the leaders of the church, the kind of highest nobles, you would say, are beings called blessed. These are humans who, through some act of service or great devotion in their lives, earned what is called a blessing, and they are given immense magical powers by the god that they follow. And these blessed, in another setting, would be considered gods themselves. They are so powerful. They have absolute mastery over their element to the point they can turn their own bodies into almost like living avatars of that element. And so, yeah, these blessed, they live for hundreds up to almost 1,000 years for some. And yeah, they have absolute control over their countries. Theocratic dictatorships all the way. And then these blessed, kind of the backbone of their power and the church's power are their descendants, who are, as the name implies, descended from a blessed themselves. And they are born with great but still weaker magical power. They can't turn themselves into their element, but otherwise they do have great control, maybe not as masterful as a blessed would, not as natural, but they're born with this control and they make up the backbone of the society. Everybody else is just a regular human who are considered vastly inferior to even the weakest of descendants. They're considered almost like an entirely different level of being. So that's kind of the basis of this world. And the main character who we get introduced to is one of those just ordinary humans. His name is Tala'Keahi. He lives in the city called Fiar, and it is the capital of the Fire Country. And he's just kind of an ordinary person. In this world, he is a bit unique, a bit kind of privileged in that he is what is called a researcher. And he is basically a special educated class of person. Their kind of whole thing, their entire life revolves around their job of being a researcher, which is to study and research the world to find ways to basically make the Fire Country stronger and the Fire Church stronger so that it can kind of defeat the other nations in this war so that the God of Fire can become the king of the gods. And early on, we meet him. The book starts, we'll skip the prologue because it's kind of its own thing, but the book starts introducing you to Tala'Keahi, sitting in an arena very similar to the old Roman Colosseum, a fight between one of these descendants of another church, fighting at first against some ordinary humans. And we get some of his internal thoughts of just how insanely kind of overpowered just this descendant who was captured by the Fire Church is when compared to these ordinary humans. And a little bit into the book, we get a bit of world building, my favorite parts. And a bit into the book, ends up in the situation where he encounters a blessed. And through some means I'm not going to spoil, he ends up in self-defense killing this fire blessed, which is supposed to be impossible. The churches are always touting about how the blessed are practically immortal, only a blessed can kill another blessed. So the fact that this ordinary just kid, practically, he's about 19, the fact that this kid just killed a blessed on accident is something that the churches cannot abide. Not just the Church of Fire, but none of them, because it's a threat to their power and their over the world. So he goes on the run because all of a sudden his own church that he has been a loyal follower of his entire life is now trying to kill him and make an example of him, is this being a one-off incident. So the book follows him on the run from not only his own nation, but all of the nations of the world are going to want to catch him and kill him. So yeah, this just ordinary, slightly privileged kid who was just trying to do the right thing one day is now on the run from beings so much more powerful than he could ever imagine.
Yeah. That is, I mean, that's a fantastic setup. Thank you, Dean. That was perfect. We got it. As you said, like the world building is rich and deep, and we've got this, character that's very relatable, a normal human, just trying to do a good job and a good deed. And then suddenly it's like on the run from every institution, every powerful being in the world, and the gods themselves, right? So that's quite a position for him to be in. And we were talking sort of before we hit record here about like different types of, no world is ever going to be exactly the same, right? That's the fun of entering into a new world and kind of getting to know how it works and the characters and all of that in this world. But we mentioned, like Avatar: The Last Airbender, not to be confused Blue People, but the Avatar: The Last Airbender, where we have the fire and the wind and the water and the earth. And you mentioned a few differences. So if someone's familiar with Avatar: The Last Airbender, how is the God's Land a little bit different, maybe similar, but with some differences to that world?
So some of the biggest differences that kind of come off the top of my head, the first one really is just kind of the darker nature of God's Lands versus Avatar. It's like Avatar, I mean, it's a fantastic show. When I finally sat down to watch it, I was blown away. It's amazing. But it is a family-friendly show, very kind of kid-focused, even if adults can like it too. But in God's Lands, while it is a young adult fantasy, it definitely, at least kind of in my opinion, gets close to the line of just being adult fantasy because it is a pretty dark world. I mean, some of the basics of this world is that it is run by theocratic dictatorships. These churches have absolute power and they abuse it really bad. And while I don't go into detail about some of the kind of the darker aspects of that, I also don't shy away from the fact that like slavery is a thing and it's kind of a constant risk for most people, of the blessed especially. They can just kind of pick somebody out on the street and be like, you looked at me wrong, or you're pretty, you're going to be my slave. They have that absolute power. So sometimes it's a bit more focused on than others, and I try not to go too gruesome about it, but this is a dark world. Yeah. So while it is young adult and it's appropriate for like teenagers, I certainly wouldn't want like a young kid to be reading this, because they're going to be facing some of the kind of more real world issues that you don't really want to expose kids to, in the things that would occur in a world that has these beings of absolute power, so certain in their own personal power that I don't think anything's a threat to them. Like, if nothing can hurt you, you can kind of do whatever you want. So that's that's kind of the biggest difference to Avatar is that while Avatar certainly has some darkness in its world, Godslands really kind of makes a point of like, yeah, this, you get a situation like this, things are not going to be all good and happy. As much as the churches try to kind of convince the people that like, oh yeah, we are good and righteous and everything is happy, it's really not. It's not grimdark. I want to make that clear because yeah, grimdark has its place. It's not quite for me.
Yeah.
So it's
a little bit more of that almost dystopian edge, Hunger Games edge, like there are power plays happening, and we've got this sort of more dissident or human class that's trying to sort of rise up to point out that like not all is well in this world, and maybe it needs to be different, and that can lead to a lot of conflict, violence. Yeah, some of those more serious.
That's a bit part of the story because you mentioned Dissidents, which I didn't in my kind of earlier thing. But yeah, there is a sort of a rebel group called the Dissidents. A lot of naming conventions in this world are pretty on the nose. It is intentional. It's not just me being lazy, but that's for people to discover for themselves why. But there's this dissident group that is made up of mostly ordinary humans, but there also are some like descendants and stuff for various reasons who get involved, who are fighting against the churches and their absolute power, and even the gods themselves, who have, for most of them, have kind of their own backstories for how or why they joined the Dissidents, but they are aware that the world is really messed up and that things need to change. It's not right. They can't just be part of the world happy with how things are. They're aware that things are really wrong and that it needs to change, and they're fighting for that.
Yeah. Well, folks, if you're listening, if you're watching, you're listening, you're like, this sounds like my kind of book, my kind of series. Good news is that because we're launching the book, we want to get it out to as many people as possible. You can actually grab a copy of the ebook for free. Now you can get ebook, physical book, whatever version you want, but the ebook is actually free today. So if you go to paperravenbooks.com/Fires Folly, all one word, or you can click the link next to this video. That link will take you straight over to Amazon. You'll see the ebook is free. Hit that download button, load it up on your Kindle, any app, any Kindle app, or just your browser even. You can go ahead and dive into Fires Folly, get to know about the God's Land series and the world that Dean's creating for us. And if you know anyone, if you have friends who love epic fantasy, love the world building, love some magic, tag them. Let them know about this new book, free ebook, and you can download it and try out the new series for yourself. And the rest of the books are going to be coming, one after another. So you can go ahead and get into Fires Folly today while we've got this promotion on the ebook coming out. And Dean, I'm curious, I'm sure you did tons of research kind of like looking into all of these things. One of the things that we're talking about off camera that was really cool, I'd love for you just to share a little bit more with us about, is those distinct countries that each of the gods rules. What were some of the considerations? Like what can we be excited to experience inside of some of these different countries that we're going to see in the God's Land?
Ooh, so I mean, I'll try to keep it kind of small because there's a lot. I kind of overbuilt this world like crazy. I mean, there's 16 distinct different countries that I have developed 7,000 plus years of history for, unique cultures, traditions. I really went far. In Fires Folly specifically, we mostly see things related to the Fire Country. We'll get a little bit of a couple of neighboring countries in. There are aspects of the other ones discussed, but mostly what we see is kind of the culture of Fire Country, especially because the book starts in Fjarn, the capital city of fire. So we kind of see a lot of that in some of the details that separate the Fire Country from some of the others. And so some of the specifics that I think people really enjoy, at least in regards to Fire Country, is the fact that like this is a world that developed differently to what we are familiar with on like Earth history. It hasn't evolved like any real world country because magic is a thing, and that's really caused changes. Like it is a medieval world. It is swords and spears, armor, horses. There are no guns or missiles or anything like that. But there are some little elements of also steampunk in it, because the world has evolved differently. Like Fjarn, something I had a lot of fun building is that there is a pipe network that encompasses the entirety of Fjarn that applies some very modern amenities like heat, fresh water, steam power to this world. And yeah, Fioran is almost like an opulent city compared to a lot of places in the world because they have these very modern luxuries based around this pipe network.
Well, I'm curious. So you told me a few things earlier, just like about the animals that might develop or the different types of
Yeah.
food that you might have. Can you kind of give us some insights into those?
Yeah, those I really enjoyed making, and do actually pop up quite a bit in the story because I couldn't resist just adding them. Yeah, so having the gods actually, these living embodiments, the gods of the elements, like fire, actually living in the world, in their palaces, in the cities, have influenced the world around them. So, like Fire Country, which is mostly what we see, it tends to be a pretty hot and dry place because of the kind of ambient magic of having the god of literal fire living in this country. And it's influenced both plants and animals, primarily around Fioran, but it still occurs further away if weaker. But these sort of strange mutations that have occurred, like food from the Firelands has a tendency to spontaneously combust if it's not handled properly. Or like eggs, a very convenient thing in the Fire Country is that you can just take eggs of almost any animal, you give them a hard shake, and they'll cook in their shells. So you get kind of a hard-boiled egg right there. And then it's talked about some animals from some of these other countries, like horses from the Light Country. Their fur, their coats can kind of shimmer, almost kind of similar to bioluminescence, which makes them actually, you can ride them pretty well in the dark because they'll kind of exhibit their own light. So they're really good. Or horses from the Earth Nation are about as sure-footed as like any real-world mountain goat. You can ride them as far as fast as you want in the dark. They're never going to trip. They'll never step in a gopher hole or anything. Very early on, when Tala is at the arena that I talked about at the beginning of the book, he is sitting on an ice wolf pelt that was imported from the Icelands way to the south, and it emanates kind of an permanent chill. So even sitting out in the sun of the hot Fire Country, in the heat and the sun, he's actually pretty comfortable because he's got this kind of chill emanating from this pelt that he's using as a seat cushion.
That's so cool. So, I mean, if you guys are getting kind of a kick out of this and you're like, that's the fun, right? Of building this world, and there's magic involved. And so you can really kind of like play with all these different concepts of like, what if?
Mm-hmm.
What if a god being physically located in a capital city actually changed plant life and animal life and even food and, all these different, like the ambiance, the weather, the geography? What if the presence of that element in such a concentrated way sort of started to ripple out and change things? Like, it's a really fun thought experiment. And then you toss in a bunch of action, adventure, being on the run, meeting with other dissidents. I'm just saying, folks, if you're still here and you're watching this, and you're kind of nodding your head along like, I think I like this book, go ahead and get a copy right now. So go to paperravenbooks.com/Fires Folly. You can grab the ebook for free right now. You can grab a physical book too if you like to have that paperback copy on your nightstand. And we hope that you dive right on into Fires Folly because the next books in the God's Land trilogy are coming soon. Dean, any other kind of words for your readers as they're diving in and meeting Tala and all the folks in the God's Land?
I honestly just hope that y'all enjoy this story. I mean, my entire life, books have always been one of my favorite things. I love nothing more than delving into this deep story where I can really connect with the characters in fascinating world building. And I love learning about different magic systems, the way different worlds work, finding characters to love or hate that I really care about. And it is my desperate hope that all of you, you read this book and you feel the same. Because I put so much of just my own kind of soul into making this book, my love and care, so much time and effort into it. And I just really hope that people can connect to these characters I've made, this world I've built. Personally, I think that once all the editing was done, I did a good job of it, and that this is a fascinating world with great characters that people will enjoy. And I really hope people do read it and just really love it, and that it means something to them.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dean. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks for having me.
and the whole God's Land with us. Thank you for taking the time and, being methodical and intentional about bringing all of this together. It really shows in these books. And we're just so excited for Fire's Folly and all of the rest of the God's Land books that are coming out. So folks, go ahead, grab a copy right now, paperravenbooks.com/Fire's Folly, all one word, or click the link next to this video. We'll take you straight over to grab your copy. All right. Thank you guys. Y'all have a good rest of your day, and we will see you next time. Bye, everybody.